What's up? First upload in a while. So, I was going to wait to do Zelda games before I played Tears of the Kingdom, but after playing Breath of the Wild and realizing that I was rushing through it and didn't do all of it, and it still took like a solid week, and that Tears of the Kingdom is like 4 times bigger, and then I'm gonna actually take my time with Tears of the Kingdom and not rush through it. It's gonna be a minute before Tears of the Kingdom I'm done with that. So I figured in the meantime, to kind of tide over before I rank Tears of the Kingdom, we can go through the games that I have played. There are a lot of Zelda games. I've not played all of them, okay? Fake fan moment. I have not played Skyward Sword. I don't hate it. I haven't played Twilight Princess or The Wind Waker or Zelda 2. So, you know, if this is like a fake fan opinion off the dome, then, you know, click off. Don't waste your time. Now, we've got the GOAT tier. This is for one game and one mod. 4 swords out of 5. It's just a joke. 4 out of 5. It means it's really good, but it's not quite perfect. Breath of the Wild. Yeah. I mean, you already know. But I'm not going to be that mean. It will be fair. And did not finish, because I have not finished some of these games. Games that I have played enough that I have an opinion on, I'm still going to rank within did not finish. But it's not fair to rank a game I haven't even finished. I've not played any of the unfinished games enough to say to really rank them, right? But first off, Ocarina of Time. It's a solid candidate. I think the original Ocarina has a lot of problems. It's pretty much like the staple of a 3D Zelda. It's like Wind Waker, Twilight Princess, Skyward Sword. It's because they're all ripping off Link to the Past, and I don't really have a problem with that as long as the game itself is fun and like does what it's doing well. But I think that because of the fact that Ocarina of Time 3D exists, we actually can't put Ocarina in the same tier. Ocarina of Time 3D is still missing goated qualities, so we're going to put Ocarina of Time down in Breath of the Wild tier. But mostly because it just has to be a tier lower than the remake. The remake is... I mean, we can just talk about Ocarina, right? It's like the Deku Tree, amazing dungeon. And this gets into a talk that we have to keep talking about with Zelda games, where the Deku Tree is more impressive when you look at it in the context of... you look at it in the context of the entire series. The Deku Tree isn't just a tutorial for Ocarina of Time. It's a transitionary dungeon for people that need to get used to 3D space. And the fact that it's a good tutorial dungeon on top of being that transitionary dungeon is like pretty amazing, right? It forces you to think about 3D space, because one of the golden Skulltula in the dungeon you can get without doing anything special, but then the other two you have to be really aware of how you can use 3D space, either by climbing to get the second one or by timing your jump to get the other one that's on the grading wall down in the bottom. And then the fact that the last Skulltula requires you to have both the bombs and the arrows, which are items that you get in the other two dungeons, it's perfect because it teaches you have to backtrack. So you learn that you can bomb walls, and then you come back later, but then you still need the bow, or the boomerang. So it kind of is like this perfect little spot of like, it's the first area of the game, and you keep coming back to it with more items to check it out and see what you can do. And that's like the entire game, because the moment you get the hook shot or the boomerang, you can just re-explore every area with like verticality. Like you can now interact with the walls and the ceiling. With fire, right, as you get Din's fire, you're able to now interact with fire and torches freely. It's not perfect, because it mostly just boils down to like boomerang and hookshot bombs and then fire. and like very weird specific instances of using the magic flowers. It's a little weird. There's also a lot of problems with Ocarina of Time outside of the way that it kind of intuitively teaches you some things that just doesn't help with others. Like, it just kind of lets you go in the beginning because you need to find the money to get the Deku shield, and you have to explore to find the sword. So it's kind of like teaching you how to look for things that are going to be like that. But then at other points, the game is just kind of obtuse. And I know that people really don't like that, but like the fact that you go to the Goron place and he's like, I need a song that's green. It's like, what the fuck does that mean? What are you talking about? Now, the game does teach you, because of the abundance of sticks and the torch puzzles and the fact that you're trying to get the bombs, the fact that there are things on the wall, it's kind of teaching you, kind of getting you to figure out that you can use the bombable walls to blow a hole, go back to the forest, and then go to Syria. But at the same time, it's not telegraphed quite enough, I don't think, for most people that don't just know it already. And that's really important, is like a lot of the stuff that you're gonna... Most of the time when people defend the really weird things in Ocarina, it's because they're very familiar with it. And that's kind of a thing where it's hard for me to judge Ocarina because I know it so well. I literally know almost every room in the game. I know where to get every item, every upgrade, every heart piece, every Skulltula. I know it all by heart, so it's kind of hard to separate that from like actually looking at it. But like, I think the fish with Jabu Jabu is like the worst thing in the game as far as that obtuse world progression goes. Because the only hint you get that you have to read is Princess Ruto saying that she was feeding Jabu Jabu. But that doesn't really work, because it's like, what was she feeding him? Like, you and me eat like not fish all the time. Plus the Zora like kind of are fish, so it's kind of weird for them to eat fish, right? It's just not that intuitive. But there is a person in Zora's domain that says if you give a fish to Jabu Jabu, something good will happen. So it's like these two opposite ends where without that one person, it's just like really difficult and obtuse to try and get through to Jabu Jabu. But then if you talk to that person, the game is just telling you explicitly what to do. So it's kind of like two ends on a spectrum that are like not really either satisfying. Ocarina did nail, I think, the dungeons. Again, I think the dungeons, it's hard for me to say if they're good or not because I know them too well. So I can't really judge them anymore because I can't really fairly think about whether they're tough or not. Like, I just know them too well. I will say the Shadow Temple is kind of eh. I think that the fact that the Shadow Temple is halted until after you do the Fire, Water, and Forest Temples also makes it way worse. Because it's like the only thing that's tough about the Shadow Temple is if you went out of your way to ignore the Lens of Truth, which you can do. You can do the entire Shadow Temple without the Lens of Truth, so if it was designed around the idea that you would be doing that, that's fine. But then if you have it, it just becomes a straightforward walk. And I like the idea of it being a gauntlet, but at the same time it's not really that tough. There's like that one boat ride where you have to fight some skeleton men, and that's it. Spirit Temple is also pretty bad, but you have to do a child part, and the interesting thing, there's like one room specifically where you fight the skeleton man that's really tough as a child, and he's like insanely difficult. He takes so many hits, and he does so much damage. And then you get back to you go back to the adult one, and in a similar room, a room that has similar structure, but you're an adult now, you fight a wolf, which is like way easier, and you fucking annihilate it in no time. And it's kind of this little like, look at how much stronger you are now, and it's very cool. But I think the game, that's kind of the extent of what it does with it. Like, you can plant flowers, and then in the future there are, there's the little warp pad thingy that flies around, and it's like, that's cool, but that's really just for like Skulltula and heart pieces. The game doesn't really toy with the time travel element too much aside from Link's design. If it was called like an alternate reality, I don't think much would change. The only things that are affected by the time travel are the beans and the Song of Storms. I'm not going to critique those being incompatible because I don't care. It's stupid to complain about that, but they're both fun ideas, but that's as far as the game ever really goes with it. As far as everything goes, they are still really fun. You've got a lot of really fun mini games. Getting all the heart pieces is really fun. You don't need to get all the Skulltula, but getting all of them isn't that bad. The only thing is that I think about 10 of the Skulltula are kind of bad. 9 of them are just putting bugs in the flower things, which doesn't make any sense. There's probably a gossip stone in the game you have to talk to figure that out. I don't consider that good. There's no way to figure that out intuitively. It's really bad. And it's coming from someone who loves the game, right? Ocarina was my favorite game of all time for a long time. And the Song of Storms in Hyrule Castle is bullshit. I don't want to hear it. Please tell me how it works, why it makes sense. Because I've never been able to figure out why Song of Storms in Hyrule Castle makes sense. Unless there's one fucking gossip stone somewhere that tells you exactly how to do it. But, again, I will say as far as the items go, it's arbitrary to restrict young Link's items as an adult. There's no reason an adult couldn't swing a stick or use a slingshot. Literally happens later on in the series, so... I do think that basically the slingshot, stick, and boomerang being worse versions of the bow, hammer, and hookshot is kind of interesting, but at the same time not really. I do think that Link's design in this game is really great, and I like the progression. You go from the green tunic and the Kokiri sword to getting the colored tunics as an adult, upgrading your shield, and getting the Big Goron sword and the Master Sword, as well as the boots. It's a very nice visual progression, and you feel like you're getting stronger as you keep getting items. And I think that that's one of the strengths of this game, is that items feel powerful, because sure, you get the bow and you have to use it on the boss, and you get a heart container. That's not really why bows make you feel so strong in this game. It's because you also go and get the heart pieces from the archery games. You can go get a bottle from the pose when you go on horseback. All of that. When you get something, it gives you opportunities to get several more things. And that's kind of like a really good strength of Zelda in general. And I think that it's encapsulated very well in this game. Like when you get the hook shot and the bombs, it changes how you play the game. Getting the bombs and hookshot alone as a child and an adult gets you, like, I think a third of the heart pieces or something crazy like that. And it's just because of how, and tons of items and upgrades. It's just, you keep getting more stuff to help you get more stuff by getting more items. And it's this progressive, like, flowing outward power progression. That feels super good. I think Ganon's castle and Ganon himself are the low point of the game. I think the problem is that Ocarina has like 3 distinct areas of the game. Maybe 4, depending on how skilled you are, I guess. You have like the child section where you're forced to only be a child. Then you have what I'm going to call the adult section, where you're supposed to play the forest, fire, and water temples before realizing that you have to be a child for either the spirit or bottom of the well, and then going back in time. So that's like the part where you're intended to stay as an adult. Then there's the exploration. Then there's the spirit and shadow temple, not exploration. And things like the Gerudo training grounds, the exploration you'll do around the world to finish everything up before Ganon, and then Ganon's Tower and Ganon. I don't really like the rooms in Ganon's Tower. It's kind of lame. It's just me, right? But I do like that at the very end you get the Golden Gauntlets and you get the defense upgrade. The defense upgrade is basically just, if you lose to Ganon, go get it. It gives you a free win. And it's fine. I guess it was kind of a fail-safe back in the day, but I don't know. Ganon himself is like okay. Him knocking the sword away is a very cool touch. It would be if you didn't have Biggoron's sword, but the idea that you're supposed to now be using your entire arsenal to see what works is very cool. But yeah, overall, I don't really care about the story in this game. If anything, I think the story is bad because there's several sections where the game forces you to stop and listen. Not listen, but watch a dumb cutscene about like, woo, whoosh, bam. And then, it doesn't have anything to do with what you're doing. When you run around the world and you talk to, like, the narcoleptic chicken man, and he's like, you want to marry my daughter? It's like, it doesn't matter what's going on with, like, Din and Ferror and Nehru. Doesn't matter what's happening with the Triforce. You know, it's a little The sages are also annoying. And Sheik is really annoying, but in the context of the story, they at least make sense. But overall, story isn't really that great. The reason why I think Ocarina of Time has to be a tier below 3D, specifically, because 3D mapped the Ocarina as one of the touch buttons, and for how much you have to use the Ocarina, that's an amazing touch. The hover and iron boots are now equipable items, which basically fixes the water temple. The game runs at a 30 frame rate, and it doesn't hardly stutter at all. It does sometimes chug a bit if you stack explosions, but compared to the original where you would noticeably chug and sometimes crash the game just from using too many bombs, or being hit by too many enemies or too many effects, it's very good. It just runs smoother. And I've played the original enough that I know the difference. Other changes are just that the game is more beautiful. I think that in the case of other games on this, the remakes might change the graphics for the worse. You might be able to say that the visual style of the N64 era actually helps because of the kind of ugly style it has for those games, but I think that for Ocarina of Time, it's going for this very vibrant, epic journey style, and the upgraded graphics really help, especially on Link. I don't really care that every game after aped Ocarina of Time as long as they either did it well or had their own identity outside of that. For instance, Wind Waker has this extremely charming art style, and it has the sea. So even though it is still Ocarina of Time again, it's got elements to distinguish it. Now, I don't know if it does it well, because I haven't played Wind Waker, but I don't really care if it apes Ocarina, because Ocarina is just aping Link to the Past. And I don't think that's a bad thing, because people that like them can tell the differences. Every romantic comedy is the exact same structure. It's because it works. If something works, you don't have to change it. You just have to make sure that you keep doing it well. And I know that that's going to sound really, like, cynical, but, like, I genuinely just don't have it in me to care. Like, it's... As long as you can give it your own identity, it doesn't really matter if the structure of a game is the same as another. Like, I don't really care if the main campaign of a shooting game is to go from point A to point B. If the shooting is fun, the game is fun. I don't care if a game has the same structure as Ocarina of Time, if doing dungeons and exploring the overworld is fun. You know, I think people like freak out way too much about games being similar. It's kind of the Pokemon effect, where I think that it's fine that they're all so similar because they all have their own, like, feel. I don't know, it was for the early ones, but yeah. And Master Quest, like, sucks. It's like, okay. I don't really care for Master Quest. I'm just gonna drop it right there. I can't stand the inverted world. I'm so used to, like, my muscle memory and, like, my memory, like my mind map of Ocarina of Time, that seeing it inverted actually makes it confusing. It, like, messes with my head to see it inverted. And I don't really care for the dungeons. They're way more cheap and just annoying. as opposed to these dungeons. These dungeons might be a little too easy at some points, but at least they don't feel cheap. Yeah. Never finished Legend of Zelda. I've tried it. Dude, I've tried it on every... It feels like every year for like 5 years there, every year I'd randomly be like, I want to try Legend of Zelda. And I'd boot it up, and I just couldn't get into it. It's like... It doesn't tell you what to do. And I know I suck. I'm not a real gamer. But it doesn't even tell you how to get the sword. And every enemy in Legend of Zelda 1 can just kill you, like, in the first screen. And it's just like... It's not a game for me. I think it definitely has its strengths, but... It's just not for me. Like, I don't really care for the visual style. It's very dated. And while I do think that some games age in, like, a graceful way despite how old they are, it just doesn't really do it for me. The sound font of the game is also kind of annoying. It's like, again, super ultra Dark Souls from Software Soulsborne difficulty, because I'm a 3DS loser, right? But it's not for me. I have not finished Link to the Past. I got to, I believe, Molduga is the name, the hamburger that spins around and knocks you off. I literally gave up at that point because it kept knocking me to the bottom of the dungeon. And I just did not want to mess with it at the time, and I just never went back. I have no doubt that if I went back to it, I could probably get past that point and try it again. And I did enjoy Link to the Past a little bit I played. It felt like, again, it had that ocarina time where you keep going back to older areas with new items and re-exploring, and it felt very good. It's just that I got very frustrated at having to go up the entire tower because I got hit one time by the boss. And I didn't even die to the boss. Like, I didn't get a game over from hearts. I just got chipped down and had to keep climbing up the tower over and over, and I just was like, I'm not in the mood for this. And then I never went back to it. But from what I played, it's definitely better than this, and it's very fun. Breath of the Wild is the next game I played. For a while, Ocarina was the only Zelda game I played. Believe it or not. I don't know where Breath of the Wild will end up in this tier, but I also, you know what, it's just not a good idea to talk about it. We'll talk about these games more, because we need to talk about Majora's Mask after Ocarina anyways, so we'll save this. Majora's Mask 3D is directly better than Ocarina. I think they both function differently. They both have their own points of being games. You don't start Ocarina of Time. You don't start Ocarina and expect what you get. You don't start Majora for the same experience as Ocarina. They're both different games. But I have only ever played the 3DS version of Majora's Mask. So keep that in mind, that I can't quite talk about the original. Majora's Mask supposedly has a lot more atmosphere on the original because of the really shitty textures and ugly N64 graphics, and that helps with like the atmosphere and like the fog that they had to apply in areas to keep the game stable and all that. And everything in general is just more ugly and creepy. And I can definitely agree from what I've seen that the N64 has much better look. But I don't think that entirely is lost in the 3D version. The 3D version does still have an extreme atmosphere. In terms of atmosphere, 3D is... Majora's Mask is still the most intensive game I've ever played. And Majora's Mask... It's really tempting to look at it and think it's like a pretentious circle jerk because of how much the game keeps saying it to you. But I really do think that there's something about the music in the game, the hopelessness that the game instills in you, but tying it into the Zelda in the title. It's like impossible to describe, but it mixes this perfect doom and gloom, infinite destruction because you keep resetting the moon. You keep resetting it over and over. And it's just this perfect mix with the typical heroic Link character and Zelda grandiosity. The two mix perfectly. I think that in any other game where the protagonist wasn't someone like Link, Majora's Mask would fall flat. It would just be miserable. It would just be fucking disgusting. But because of the fact that it's got Link in there and the spirit of Zelda, I think it works. Basically, the entire point of Majora's Mask thematically is about overcoming death and basically negativity. Very deep, I know. Very interesting, deep, unique take that no one has ever heard. But I think the best way to kind of illustrate it is the Fierce Deity Mask. So, usually when you get to the final boss of a Zelda game, it's like the toughest boss in the game or whatever. Usually Ganon is pretty hard, like in Link to the Past or the original Zelda. Maybe not Ocarina of Time. But the final boss in most Zelda games is usually kind of tough. But 3D Majora's Mask trivializes Majora, the boss, if you get the Fierce Deity Mask. And you get the Fierce Deity Mask by trading all of the masks that you got over your journey to the various masked children on the moon. And the way that you get these masks is by helping people. So, the Mask of Sense, you get it after you save Woodfall and get the princess to the father, and you race the Deku Butler, and he remarks that it was like racing his own son, and that he sees his son in you because you're wearing the Deku mask of the scrub who died. And so essentially you give him one last race with his son. It's not saving him, it's not, healing him or whatever, but it's a nice gesture. When you get the bomb mask, it's because you save an old lady from being robbed. When you get the postman's hat, it's because you saved the postman's life by giving him the letter. When you get Kafei's mask, it's because you're agreeing to help a mother look for her child. Granted, he's an adult, but it's still a nice gesture. When you get Don Giro's mask, it's because you give a starving Goron food. When you get the Bremen mask, it's because you listen to someone confess. They get their guilt off of them. When you get Kamaro's mask, you heal his soul and allow him to pass on to the afterlife. You get all of these masks, or most of them at least, by helping people. So the Fierce Deity Mask is basically you having helped everyone. To give those masks away, you have to have gone to everywhere. To get the Gibdo mask, you have to go to Ikana Canyon. To get Don Giro's mask, you have to go to the Goron village. To get the Stone mask, at least in 3D, you have to go to the Pirate's Fortress in the Bay. And to give away the Mask of Sense, you have to go down to Woodfall. You have to go all over the map. You have to help all these people. And you give it up for the Fierce Deity's Mask because... And when you give it up for the Fierce Deity's Mask, you trivialize Majora. Majora is a cakewalk. He's easy. He's laughably easy with the Fierce Deity's Mask. You can beat all 3 of his phases in under a minute with the Fierce Deity's Mask. And the reason this is because all of those masks mean that you've helped people. You've helped people overcome their grief, their anger, their denial of their death. You've helped them pass on. You've helped save them, just their lives, their business, everything. You've helped them. So it basically is you overcoming hatred. It's you overcoming negativity itself. And if you can do that, if you can go through these cycles over and over, which you have to go through multiple cycles to get all the masks. If you can do this over and over and you can help everyone, then you're a hero. You know, you've overcome death, you've overcome grief, you've overcome anger, you've overcome hatred, you've overcome all these things. And Majora's Mask is basically just negativity. It's just all these things condensed into one mask. So if you can overcome all those things throughout the course of the game, then yeah, Majora's Mask is a joke. You've already overcome him by getting all the mask and helping everyone. And that's like really strong, and you feel it when you play. It's literally you as a player playing the game makes you a hero, makes you nice and kind like Link is, and it helps you overcome the final boss. It literally ties in the theme of the game into the gameplay, into the character. It's like perfect. It's beautiful. It's what is that? It's like every down to the last minute detail. It's perfect. The problem with 3D comes mostly from the gameplay. The 3DS version, for some reason, decided to get rid of Zora Link's swimming, and I have played with it enabled, so I know that they really did screw up by taking away the swimming. There's no reason to do that. It's unnecessary. They changed Deku Link's Zora swimming, or bubble bouncing, whatever you want to call it. They made too many of the areas too easy. Just a whole lot of changes that just don't make any sense. And when you look at the director, he said before that he doesn't really like Majora's Mask and that he doesn't look back on it fondly. And this comes more into a personal thing, but I really have a pet peeve for people who resent creations that basically helped them. It's just me, but it like seriously irks me. And a part of me kind of feels that whenever you play Majora's Mask. It kind of feels like someone, whenever you know that something was a change that was different in the original, it feels dirty, and I don't really like that. I don't know the man's name, but the person who directed this Majora's Mask wasn't the original person who directed the other Zeldas, but because of his role in directing this, he basically got a better position, in a sense, done more things, including games I like. But it really gets on my nerves when people resent things that made them successful. The changes in this game do feel more like they come out of a place of not understanding the game. Basically, go watch Neryl's video on the Majora's Mask 3D remake. But yeah, the game structure works fine. That was all of the thematic stuff. The gameplay element of it is basically just Ocarina of Time, but improved. You have way more abilities, right? Everyone says, oh, I don't like Majora's Mask because they get rid of the items, right? But when you really look at it, right? Here we go. Okay, Deku Sticks. They're in Majora's Mask. The slingshot, it's basically replaced by the bubble that Deku Link has. Majora's Mask, linearly, is a much shorter game, so they decided to make the slingshot much worse in the form of the bubble. The bubble isn't accurate, it's very weak, and it consumes magic. So it basically fulfills the same role as the slingshot, being the young, early version of something you'll get later in the bow. Then the boomerang is incorporated into Zora Link's movement. He has the ranged attack, which is the boomerang. Deku Nuts are in the game. The Ocarina's in the game. Lens of Truth is in the game. These are all in the game. This is the hookshot returns. The Megaton Hammer is incorporated into Goron Link's moveset. All the arrows are there. The trade item is relegated to its own discrete section, and there's actually more trade items. There's more bottles, and there's a lot more masks. You get the Razor Sword, and then the Gilded Sword, and then the Great Fairy Sword. As far as your tunics go, you have the Transformation Masks, which are much better. The Hover Boots are basically replaced by Deku Link. The Iron Boots are replaced by Zora Link. You have a Mirror Shield. And the only thing missing are these, the medallions. But because of how many, not the medallions, the spells. This is obsoleted by the Fire Arrows. This is obsoleted by Song of Soaring. And this is kind of dumb. So, there's all that. And then on top of that, Majora's Mask has masks. They have masks that let you move faster. They have masks that let you use bombs without bombs. They have masks that make enemies ignore you. They have a mask that invalidates the Gibdo enemy. They have... What are some other masks? They have a mask that lets you dance. It's very cool. They have a mask that basically helps you with the Skulltula grind in this game, right? The Great Fairies. And when you get into the gameplay loop of Majora, basically you enter an area and then you have to do a regional puzzle to get to the temple. Then you do the temple, and then after the temple, the regional area changes as a result of your actions. And then you have to go back and keep looking over and over with different items after different cycles. So for the most part, you beat an area, and then you can go back and get the items. But for some of them, you'll have to do it in a different cycle. So like, most people are not going to beat Snowhead their first time on their first day in time to get the Razor Sword in. So you'll have to go back to get the Gold Dust. And you just have to learn over the course of playing the game, knowing where things are, how long things take, your skill level, how long it's going to take, and you manage your time. The 3-day time cycle, I think, is perfect. I love how it works. It's a little quick in Majora's Mask 3D, but it's still manageable with the Song of Reverse Time. It just the feel of learning it and managing your time. There's no real penalty for just doing 20 cycles and taking your time to do all of it, but it's more of a self-imposed thing where the game organically gets you to want to do it faster because of the fact that every time you reset a time cycle, it feels bad. Going back to the thematic and the story relevant elements of the game, it makes you want to help the world more and more every time that you go back, and it makes you want to do it in less cycles. It doesn't change anything to do it in less cycles or more cycles, but for some reason it feels like it to you. And it's a very strong feeling that motivates you to play the game better and better. I do think that some of the controls are a little slippery. The camera in particular is very wonky in this game. Zora and Goron Link control a little weirdly in their terrains. And I do think that reflects much worse on the 3DS remake because they had time to smooth it out and iron it out, and they just didn't. So I mean, like, F, I guess. That's pretty much everything about Majora's Mask that I think is relevant. Majora's Mask is much more so built around time management and the time cycle, and then the actual gameplay, because Majora's Mask gets into kind of a discussion about how much of a game that you talk about and like should be the atmosphere, or specifically the experience of playing the game, versus how good the game itself is. That's very relevant for games like Breath of the Wild, when you get into what is an experience versus what is gameplay. Because eventually the atmosphere of Majora will wear off, especially if you play it a bunch back to back. And I think that even when the atmosphere wears off, it's still an amazing game just because of the time-based system and the collectathon nature of it. You're trying to get all these items, you're trying to get these heart pieces, masks, items, upgrades, you're trying to help people, you're trying to fill up the bomber's notebook. It still has a core gameplay loop that works really well even after you even after the atmosphere wears off. So even though a game like Ocarina kind of keeps its atmosphere longer because its atmosphere isn't so intensive and extreme, the core gameplay of Ocarina is still weaker. 10 years later, I guess, for the 3D now. But Majora's Mask gameplay is just equally as strong, if not better, over time, the better and better you get at the game. Even if the atmosphere wears off, because you can't be doom and gloom after seeing it the 40th time, right? But I still think that the first few times that you'll experience it, the way that the atmosphere will impact you and the story is still worth experiencing, and the gameplay is really good. So that's why I think Majora's Mask is above it. But I think that the 3DS remake changes keep it from being in the top tier. If only you could play Majora's Mask Restoration. If I do not link it below, please yell at me to link it. In the description or the comments, I'll try to do both. There is a YouTuber, not a YouTuber, but a person with a YouTube account called Leo. And Leo has done the Majora's Mask 3DS restoration project. I'm scared to open my homepage. Okay. Yeah, Leo Majora. No, not my... Don't look at that. That's cringe. I cannot find their channel right now. This is very embarrassing. Okay. It will be in the description, okay? But they have changed several things about the game. They have made it so that you can map the 1 and 2 buttons on the 3DS to controller inputs, which is a godsend if you're playing it on Citra. They have made it so that difficulty has been restored. The flying platforms in the Deku Palace are an example. The boss fights have been altered so that you don't have to hit a weak point. That was introduced in the remake. Zora swimming is back. Deku Link's momentum is back. There's fast Song of Soaring. There's fast Elegy of Emptiness, which is essentially the water temple for the Majora's Mask. There's the Song of Reverse Time now goes back down to 1/3 original pace instead of 1/2 in the 3DS remake. Majora's Mask Restoration is not flawless, but it is as close as we're going to get. It maintains all the atmosphere of the original. If it's your first time playing, it makes just so many intuitive choices. Ocarina is on the... You have the D-pad. Even on the 3DS, you have the D-pad, and it goes unused. In Restoration, up is Goron Link, left is Zora Link, down is Deku Link, right is Ocarina. And that is so brilliant. It streamlines the game so much. It makes me want to sequence break and get the masks without doing anything else, because of the fact that being able to fluidly play as all of these characters makes Link feel as good as fucking possible, man. Then you have X and Y, and then by holding ZR and pressing X or Y, you do your input of 1 and 2 on the 3DS, and it's so seamless once you get used to it. It's so beautiful. You still have your sword and your shield. You have the Ocarina to free use. You have all 3 of the default transformation masks. You have 4 buttons. And if you have the arrows equipped, they make a change to where ZL will shift you between the types of arrows you have. So assuming that you have the bow equipped, in reality, you have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11 items to use at any point. Not to mention the fact that the pit graph box is now tied to ZL without additional input. So you actually have 12 items that you can use at any point in time in gameplay. And you would not believe the change that being able to use that many items makes. Majora's Mask is a game that relies on so many different items. So when you can use all of those items fluidly and combine them all into this one scheme, it's beautiful. It creates this loop of gameplay where you just can't stop. You just keep going and going, because there's never a point where you have to keep going and pausing and going, oh, I need this. Oh, now I need this, and you have to pause and pause and pause. It makes you want to go. It enforces and reinforces that idea of go, go, go. And it's so beautiful. The first time you play the Song of Soaring, the whole thing plays, but after that, you just instantly warp, because you don't want to watch it again. You've already watched it once. Everything. Majora's Mask Restoration is not an official release, but it changes the game so drastically that I have to put it on here. I think Restoration 3D might be my favorite Zelda game of all time. But I can't fairly say the 3DS is actually that high because it has its own problems. And I don't like to consider mods for the original game. I like to consider if a mod overhauls a game this drastically and just adds so many quality of life and smooths out the gameplay, I don't consider this really the same game. Having that many changes and improvements really does make them feel like two different games. It's beautiful. That's why he's the MVP. That's why he's the GOAT. The GOAT. That's G-O-H-T. You know what, actually? That's why he's the GOAT. That's really funny. I should have thought of that before. Okay. After this, we only have these to talk about. I think Link Awakening is pretty good. After those last two, 20-minute sections, I'm sorry, but I just don't have much to say about this game. It's got the kind of Majora's atmosphere where it's kind of this surreal experience where you get attached to the world, and because of that, you don't want to beat the game. There's actually a manga for this where Link just decides mid-adventure to just stop progressing the game. Because, spoilers, if you haven't played this game, I don't think the spoilers matter because the game tells you midway through anyways, but the whole thing is a dream. And when Link realizes this, he stops trying to end it. Because he's like, well, it seems to be harmless and I want to be here because I like these people. You kind of like the world and you don't want it all to end. So it creates this really bitter, painful ending. It's kind of like the inverse of Majora, where it's kind of pleasant throughout, and then the ending is just really brutal and bitter. Whereas Majora is kind of really dour the entire game, and then it has this beautiful ending. It's like the inverse. I've only played the Switch version of Link's Awakening. I think it looks good. I wish that it didn't chug, because I've actually taken hits from getting chugged in the overworld, and it kind of sucks. Could have been streamlined a bit more. You still have to menu a lot for items because you basically keep Rock's Feather permanently, but at least the Pegasus boots are permanent. It has that feeling of Link to the Past in Ocarina, where every time you get a new item, you go back through and explore the entire map over again to look for secrets. I think that it does have some of that Ocarina obtuseness where the owl will go from being go to this place and talk to this person, and you're like, okay, that's great. And then he'll be like, a fish in the pond like the stream, and it's like, what do you mean? What does that mean? And then you just have to talk to every single person in the game from top to bottom to figure out what he meant. And it's really annoying, the progression. I will say that the dungeons in Link's Awakening are excellent. I actually got stumped on them because I'm a dum-dum. So, I really enjoy them. But overall, it's just a nice little pleasant 2D Zelda. I'd say it's funnier than a lot of other Zeldas. It's just it's not laugh out loud funny, but it's just charming. It'll get a grin out of you, a chuckle. It'll make me giggle. It'll make me squee and XD. The upgrade system is nice. The only tip I have for you for Link's Awakening is to always choose the red tunic. Because it sounds weird, but you're actually more bulky with the red tunic. Because if you choose the blue tunic, you have to get in a lot more hits than if you choose the red tunic, which means that you'll be more vulnerable to getting hit. So it's basically like you didn't pick the blue tunic. But if you choose the red tunic, you have to get in less hits, which means you're in less positions to get hit. so you're bulkier. And yeah, I don't know. I don't have like a particularly deep relationship with Link's Awakening in the same way I do with a lot of other Zeldas. But I think that it's definitely worth playing. It's definitely really good. The atmosphere is really good for what it's trying to do. The exploration is really good for what it's trying to do. The dungeons are excellent. It doesn't run quite well, and I think it's a little expensive for what the game is, but at least it was when I bought it. It might have went down in price, but I don't think Nintendo games go down in price. But yeah, maybe you can get it to run smoother on emulators. I haven't touched Switch emulators because they all sound like a massive headache, but even on handheld, Link's Awakening chugs pretty bad, which is unfortunate. But it's a very fun, nice game. Not particularly long, but it's nice. Another thing to talk about is the hidden story ending in Link's Awakening, which I think invalidates the theme of the game. All I'm going to say is that if you know what the true ending of the game is, if you play the game and you don't die ever, you get a secret cutscene at the end. But that cutscene invalidates the message of the game, and I don't actually like that cutscene for that reason. But yeah, that's about it. I don't have any really strong feelings on this. It's just a very nice, good Zelda game. Alright. Yeah, I'm never gonna play a Dark Souls game. I use save states when I can on emulators. I play on normal mode. I mean, just get all of it out of the way. A Link Between Worlds is painfully easy. But for the cost of being the easiest baby game in the series, it accomplishes something even Breath of the Wild can't, which is a world that is both fun, rewarding, and like very what is the word I'm looking for? I don't know really how to describe it, but the world is fun to explore. You constantly get rewarded for exploring. You're able to explore. Pretty much from the moment that you can start swinging your sword, you can run around the whole map and start doing stuff. You need to get merged to really explore the world, but you're still free to do quite a bit once you get merged. And you want to explore the world because in Link Between Worlds, to get items, you have to pay Ravio to rent them or to buy them. And every time you die, rented items get changed back. So you have to keep paying money if you die. Obviously, you're not going to die that much because it's easy baby mode. But it adds this value to rupees. Which means not only do you want to go out and explore the world for rupees, but then as you explore the world for rupees, you keep finding new things. You can find heart pieces. You can find Maya Mais. Maya Mais act as Skulltula for the completion sake, but they also incentivize you to do it because they upgrade your items. Some of your upgraded items can outclass the Master Sword. Because once you beat the 3rd Light World dungeon, you're allowed to buy items, and when you buy an item, you can upgrade it. And before you upgrade the Master Sword, upgraded items outclass your sword. The Fire Rod is disgusting. The hook shot is amazing. The arrows are great. Bombs are amazing. And in that Link to the Past Ocarina sense, the world needs all these items for you to explore. But the beauty is that you can have all the items as soon as after the first dungeon. You can rent all of them but the Sand Rod. So you can keep all these items on you to just keep interacting and exploring with the world, but it increases the risk of you exploring an area you're not ready for, losing all those items, and then having to get them back. It adds these values to rupees that they've never really had. And it just creates this seamless world. Not to mention the fact that after you get merged, you can do either of the areas in the order you want. And then once you get the ability to go to the Dark World, you can literally just do any of the dungeons you want but the Sand Palace. It's the only one where you have to go get the special item. And Low Roll Castle, because you have to do all the others. But there's that. And then the fact that they also allow you to sort of do Breath of the Wild, where you can sort of solve puzzles in unintended ways. Which is kind of nice, but they still have clearly intended ways for you to solve them. So it's still rewarding to do it the original way, but you also have this sort of out-of-the-box thinking you're allowed to do. For instance, if you carry bombs into certain areas where you're not supposed to, you can break certain things that allow you to maneuver easier. If you use the hook shot, you can get keys in certain angles easier. Things like that. Bombs allow you to interact vertically with the world, so you can throw them one ledge higher than you. Certain areas are gated off to try and get you to do merge puzzles, but you can just throw bombs at certain elevations and it works. It's really solid. The story is like whatever, but I don't care about the story, and it's not too intrusive. It's about as bad as Ocarina of Time, but it's a little quicker, and like the story is fine for what it is, but the story is not important, so it doesn't focus on it too much. But you just want to keep exploring the world. You want to keep finding things, and it's because it keeps making you stronger to explore the world, and it ties into this loop where you explore, and initially it's very scary and dangerous because you're weak, and then the more you explore, the stronger you get. And then because you're ready to explore the world more, you keep exploring, and then you get stronger and stronger. And it does trivialize the game, and the idea that you can have all the items before Dungeon 2 does definitely make it a little too strong. You're definitely overpowered in this game, and the game is very baby mode easy. But it does give off this genuine feeling like you can just do whatever you want and go on the map. The map is much more constrained than Breath of the Wild, but the entire map is actually fun to explore. The story is about on par with Breath of the Wild, if not a little stronger. And the use of items in the dungeons is very interesting and cool. It also keeps this really interesting idea that your traditional dungeon item usage is given to you all at once, but you still get your upgrades naturally through the dungeon. So you get the ability to upgrade the Master Sword, greater strength, more stamina or magic, and upgraded shield, upgraded tunic. You actually get one of the items through a dungeon still. You get the Sand Rod from Thieves Town. So it still keeps that element into it. What am I thinking of? I'm trying to think of something, but I don't know what I'm trying to think of. I don't know what I'm thinking about. I just completely spaced out. Exploring the world and getting Maiamais helps with your items to make them stronger so that they stay relevant throughout the entire game. I can't for the life of me think about what I was about to say. Oh, the difficulty. The difficulty is definitely trivial compared to most Zelda games. It's very easy. And that does come at the expense of the world being open. But it's also not the only game in the series that people like that suffers from the same problem. So I don't have any doubts about putting it this high because of that. I do think that, like, Majora's Mask, it has a few things keeping it back from being, like, perfect, but mostly the difficulty. However, the difficulty still does feel like it does have certain intended order. For instance, the Ice Palace and Turtle Rock feel distinctly harder than Thieves Town or Skullwoods. Not by much, but it still feels like at some point they intended for them to be an order, and you can just go anywhere. the way that merge works, that's what I was going to talk about, is the item system, the magic system. The way that merge works is perfect because it's this perfect thing that keeps you thinking about in every area. Where does my elevation match with the timing where I can go somewhere else? When can I use merge in combat to get away from an attack? When will merging get me punished? Because if you try to merge with an enemy that can keep up with your speed, he'll instantly get you the moment you come out. So you actually have to know when to merge. Merging takes up your magic, and magic in this game is perfect. It perfectly encapsulates with the renting system how I think infinite item usage can be done. So, when you rent bombs, you have bombs. You never run out. But you can temporarily run out by running your magic meter dry. I don't know how that works, but it does. You can use bombs infinitely as long as you have magic. So if you need to time a bomb and then merge run somewhere for a switch deflect to get you, let you drop down or whatever, you have to consider, when do I merge in order to not waste all of my magic after using the bomb? And it creates this system where you're never really stumped on items, right? Breath of the Wild explicitly went out of its way to make sure you didn't have permanent bombs. And I think that this game kind of handles it well. You have bombs, and they're there for puzzles, but at the same time you still have to manage them well as a resource in tandem with your merging, which I think the equivalent would be stamina in Breath of the Wild, but you couldn't really merge those two. Sort of like how you have to manage your timing on stasis, but it would be like if you had to time how much magnesis, stasis, and bomb usage you can use all in one meter. It creates this really interesting idea where you can plant a bomb for a puzzle, but then that means that you won't have the resources to use your fire rod on enemies. Where you can merge, but that means when you emerge, you'll have to rely on, when you re-emerge, you'll have to rely on your sword. It's really fun. I do think that the difficulty hampers Link Between Worlds, but not too bad. I'm really bad at video games, so for me, I think it's just right, but I understand that the difficulty is significantly lowered from most other games. Hero mode supposedly fixes this. I haven't played it yet, but taking 4 times the damage and having no heart drops sounds like it sounds too extreme in the other direction. But if you think it's too baby easy, try hero mode, and maybe you'll come out of this liking it more. But yeah, Link Between Worlds, despite the fact that you can technically have almost all the items before you even go to the Dark World and get like half of the Maya-Mai's or whatever, it still does have that Ocarina of Time, Link to the Past, Link's Awakening feel of the amount of items you have and how strong they are affects how you can interact with the world. And it's very strong, because you can go anywhere at basically any time and do anything after the first dungeon. It's really fun. I think Link Between Worlds is also an Ocarina of Time example where looking at it in the context of the games is kind of important and interesting. Skyward Sword, whether it's good or bad, was criticized very harshly for its linearity and its dependence on the Zelda formula. And Link Between Worlds comes out and is so radically different from what linear Zelda had become. And it kind of proved that Zelda really can just do whatever it wants whenever. I honestly believe without Link Between Worlds, we never would have gotten Breath of the Wild. Because it's that perfect little window of kind of proving, like, yeah, this can work. So they were allowed to go even stronger, because they knew they could. That's more speculative, but I do think it's worth considering. I think that Leo's mod makes Majora's Mask slightly better than Link Between Worlds, but they're very good for different reasons. I started Triforce Heroes just because of how much I love the Link Between Worlds aesthetic. But I can't stress this enough, it's a multiplayer game. Playing it alone feels miserable. It's charming, though. You can dress Link up as a cheerleader. I know that's something. You can stand on top of each other and shoot arrows at different elevations. That's very cool. It's very epic. I'm giving thumbs up motion. And Breath of the Wild. Breath of the Wild is probably better than the original Ocarina. It may... Realistically, it's probably a tier between these two. But I want to make something crystal clear. Perfectly see-through clear. It's a good game. I love Breath of the Wild. But it kind of sucks. It's got a lot of problems. And I really think that the audience has actually influenced how I feel about Breath of the Wild. Because when I played it my first playthrough, I had a lot of problems with it. I got very sick of it near the end. But at the end of the day, I was like, I had multiple hundreds of hours, right? And I was like, that was amazing. Like, I loved it. But I was like, it still has a lot of problems. Maybe I hope with the sequel it'll get better. But you look at these videos of these people saying that Breath of the Wild has problems, because it does, and they like get attacked just because they say it has problems, like it has flaws. And it's crazy to me. Breath of the Wild stands are some of the most subhumans I've ever met. They just like will not allow you to critique the game. Like Link Between Worlds, it's my favorite non-mod game. And I kept saying it was too baby easy. Because it is. It's a problem with the game. It's a flaw. Games have flaws. Games are not perfect masterpieces that have zero problems with them. No movie, no book, no game, no show, no painting, no piece of art has no flaws. Right? And something specifically I want to talk about with Breath of the Wild is that the one recurring thing people are talking about with Tears of the Kingdom is that all the problems of Breath of the Wild were heard and addressed. So Tears of the Kingdom is literally just Breath of the Wild improved. But if we hadn't critiqued Breath of the Wild, if people hadn't said, oh, this sucks, maybe this should change, if we had just gone, no, it's perfect, it's good, it would create this really stagnant Zelda. And that's what people were complaining about, is that Zelda was stagnant, with Skyward Sword and Twilight Princess, Wind Waker all being Ocarina Plus. And then Breath of the Wild comes out, and they're like, no, it's perfect, we can't change it. It's like, it's really weird. And something even more important is no one problem from Breath of the Wild stops me from loving it. Like, I don't like the weapon durability, spoiler. But if that was the only problem, Breath of the Wild would be like a 9 out of 10, 10 out of 10. If that was the only problem, Breath of the Wild would absolutely be like almost perfect. Right? But it's not. Breath of the Wild has a lot of problems. And none of them are big, but you feel them all constantly. If you're not feeling one problem, you're feeling another. And you cycle through all the problems because it's such a big game. And it doesn't feel good. So the most important thing, right, is the open world. I really praised Link Between Worlds for the open world. So what about Breath of the Wild? Yes, the world is open. And what are you doing? You're climbing things. So you get to watch Link go, ugh, 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 for 10 minutes, because at the beginning of the game you can't jump. You don't have the resources to jump. So, okay, fantastic. You're climbing up things, and what do? You get shrines. So you do like most piss easy baby mode shit ever, and you get a spirit orb, which fills up your health, but you have to get 4 of them to actually make progress on your stamina wheel or heart piece. That's really weird. Your stamina wheel could have upgraded. Your stamina wheel already increases in fifths, so there's no reason it couldn't have gone down to 20ths or however small it would have been, and you couldn't have got quarter of hearts. That would have made the progress more continuous and gradual, but immediate. It would have reinforced your progress faster, right? Already though, I need some water. Already though, it introduces the problem of, do you care about intrinsic or extrinsic rewards, right? I'm not sure which is which, but it's basically a big word description of, do you care about doing something in a game because it makes you feel rewarded, or do you need something in the game to tell you you've been rewarded? So, like, for instance, when you beat Ganon in any game, it plays a ginormous cutscene, and there's some emotional moment. In Link Between Worlds, it's the Dark World, it's Low Roll getting their Triforce back. In Majora, it's everyone being happy. In Ocarina of Time, it's everyone in the past or everyone in the future reuniting. And that's an extrinsic motivation. It's telling you, this is great. You did it. It's amazing because of this. Whereas intrinsically, you want it to beat the game to continue getting better at the game mechanics and complete it to get over the finish line. So it comes down to, in Breath of the Wild, do you care about climbing a mountain because you proved to yourself you could climb the mountain, or do you care about climbing the mountain because you wanted what's up there? And the problem is that while at first in Breath of the Wild I approached it more doing it because I wanted to do it, the game only lasts so long on that. The 40th mountain you climb is not motivating anymore because you can climb it. You know you can climb it. The game gives you ample resources at almost every point in the game after like 2 hours off the plateau. But yeah, you can climb anything. You get enough stamina wheels to do anything. Hell, you even get enough stamina wheels to speed it up. And you get Rivali's Gale, and you get food, which basically means you have infinite stamina. So after the 40th or 50th mountain you climb, it's not really, can I do it because I want to do it. It's, oh, I got to get up there. So eventually, you start running back into, well, why am I doing it? So I can go to the most mid-ass shrine that exists in Earth, or so that I can, like, pick some butterflies or some shit. And it kind of gets into, like, well, the core gameplay loop kind of sucks because of the combat. Everything loops into another problem. Like, you want to get the shrines. Why do you want to get the shrines? Do you want to explore? Well, why are you exploring? Okay, if you're exploring, are you doing it for combat? And if you're going to combat, combat has its own problems. And it's just, I think Breath of the Wild, a lot like Majora's Mask, is one of those games that is wildly different as an experience than as a game. My first experience with Breath of the Wild is magical. I would recommend anyone who likes video games to play Breath of the Wild at least once, even if you never play it again, because that first experience is something magical. But when you look at it as a game and you go back to it, it's so hard to like. Because once you know what's at the top of that mountain, the next time you're not motivated by, I want to make sure I can do it. You're thinking, do I need the spirit orb up there yet? Can I beat that major test of strength yet? It becomes significantly more gamey than magical and exploratory and all that. And it's when it starts to kind of weaken. There's also the fact that combat in this game is pretty central. One of the constant rewards you get for exploring is gear and weapons, but it feels hollow because all of your weapons break. It doesn't matter how cool the weapon is, it breaks. Your Master Sword breaks. Yes, I know. It doesn't leave your inventory. That doesn't mean it doesn't break. It puts real life 10-minute timer on it to make sure you can't use it all the time. It's very hard to feel like you get tangible rewards in Breath of the Wild because basically the few things you get that are permanent additions are the gear. You get the ability to swim with waterfalls, you get the ability to climb faster, you get the ability to run faster at night, to sneak around easier. But that's gear, and not only does that kind of introduce the tedium that you're constantly going into your menu to switch gear, but it also introduces this problem of gear and defense in combat, to where at the beginning of the game you're just way too squishy. Like, everything kills you in a few hits, and then in the middle of the game you have enough heart pieces and food that it kind of feels like you're taking damage, but you actually have this giant store, so it's like you just have to make sure to time it. But then in the late game, you just upgrade your gear and you never get hurt. If you upgrade anything to 4 stars, you're just invincible. Like, I don't think Calamity Ganon, like the boss fight in Hyrule Castle, can even hurt you, like, I think more than 6 hearts if you have the max defense possible in this game. And it's like, it's kind of insane. You can carry around 30 full heal dishes that you can eat at any point in time, which is nuts. And you have all of the champion abilities. You have a permanent fairy, you have a really strong OP attack, you have 3 permanent get out of jail free card defenses. And so it feels like all these things were intended so that no matter which direction you went to get stronger, you would have some way to get strong enough to outpace combat. But at that point, what's the point of combat? It feels like the only way to make combat in this game not too easy or too hard is if you don't know how to increase. You would have to, like, accidentally make combat perfect for yourself. Because if you go out of your way not to really get that much stronger, it doesn't feel like you're progressing in the game, like in the traditional way you would in a Zelda game. Like, it doesn't feel like you're getting items that get you more heart pieces that make you stronger, because you have all the items at the start. So it's just, okay, if you want heart pieces and stamina wheel, you just go run straight for them. And you can. It just destroys this weird pacing. And something that I really do like about Breath of the Wild is that Breath of the Wild actually sort of does have an intended structure. I think a lot of people would get mad hearing that, but if you actually pay attention to how the game paces you early on, the game pretty heavily nudges you towards Kakariko. And then in Kakariko they go, oh, well, your first memory was over on Mount Lanayru, and you should probably go talk to the people in Hotno. And then you go do that, and they point you towards Akala. And on the way to Akala, you run into the Zora domain. You do that. And then from Akala, you're left to do whatever you want again, so you'll probably go to the volcano, because it's closest. From there, you'll probably keep going to the forest, get the Master Sword, circle around to the Rito, and then go down south to Gerudo. And there's even things in the pacing of the game that indicate this. Like, when you look at just the general world, enemies in those first few areas from Dueling Peaks and Hotno and Lanayru tend to be weaker, as opposed to other regions which have pretty souped up enemies even from the start. Not to mention, the item you get from doing Divine Beast, whatever, water dungeon, is basically a fairy. So it's basically just a get out of jail free card. And then you get the ability to get your guardian weapons, but you need a lot of money, so you can't really do it early on, but it's always there. And you can upgrade your stasis and all of that when you go down south. So that's like kind of early on. And it makes all the dungeons easier. And then when you go over left, you have to solve the environmental puzzle of the flame resistance, because you'll literally just burst into flame. And the lady at the stable sells it to you, so it's like the game gives you a pretty easy get out of jail free card if you don't want to actually do it yourself. So then you go through that, and then you go left, and you're introduced to the Master Sword, and it's kind of up to you how to solve it. Do you want to go do a ton of shrines and get enough heart pieces on top of the stamina you have, or do you want to go trade and pay to have your stamina swapped for heart pieces, right? That's kind of its own thing. And then whenever you go left, you kind of get de-incentivized from exploring Hebra because of how cold it is. You head to the Rito village, obviously, if you're going in the circle that the game has kind of nudged you towards. And again, To get to Rito Village, you don't need cold or hot resistance, but to get to the person who gives you the quest onto the Divine Beast, you do need it. But the solution is in the village. So again, it's pretty free. You go in there, get the snow armor, and then you can go on the beast. So it's pretty fair there too. But then finally, you go to the Gerudo Desert, and not only do you need hot resistant armor, which you can't get until you go through the area, but you need cold resistant armor for the night. So it's judging you on 2 different armors. And then one of them you have to traverse the area probably during the conditions to get. So on top of the fact that the boss progression and difficulty is kind of also in that order, give or take some, but Thunderblight Ganon is definitely the most difficult boss in the game. It feels very distinctly like that is the order they went for, but rather than making it so that it's very difficult if you break order, it feels like throughout the game they just sort of put in a ton so that you can always have enough to kind of brute force it. Which links back to the problem of difficulty with Link Between Worlds. It creates this weird sense where you kind of have to just not think about how to like break the game, and you have to be careful. Like even then, you can still accidentally break the game and just make it way too easy. I am a very bad video game player. I'm very bad at video games. I think I need to reset this. I'm very bad at video games, but I accidentally broke the... I mean, not accidentally, but even as bad as I am, I can still brute force the game with what the game gives me. And it's fine, but at the same time, it comes with a lot of problems. It just doesn't feel satisfying as you get stronger, because it's more so that you have this giant arsenal of food, rather than your sword is stronger that you've earned, or that you got this magic defense upgrade because, I don't know. That also comes with the problem that to get a lot of these resources and upgrades, you have to go and explore, and it's not bad, but you have to get items, so you basically just start farming. If you want to upgrade your sneak stuff, you have to farm Sunset Fireflies, and it's a little tedious. As opposed to Link Between Worlds, you go into an area, you see a Mai, and it's either direct and it's free, or you have to figure out how to get it. Breath of the Wild is somewhat similar. For instance, to get a Sunset Firefly, you either have to wear the stealth suit, which you get through money, so you have to figure out a way to get money, or you just have to sneak on it, or you have to survey the area and kind of figure out how to land on it. It is interesting, but sometimes it's not. There are several points in the game where it's just go get this item that you just have to figure out where it is. Like, the amount of things that need gems, and it's like reliably getting gems can be really annoying. It turns into farming. And I think you can pretty organically get enough money just by mining wherever you go. But at the same time, if you don't organically get what you need, it can feel jarring to go and farm for something. The story, I think, is... In fairness, you can skip the story. You can skip almost every story cutscene, but the story is really bad. It is Ocarina of Time level, but the problem is that it's presented as like this amazing, brilliant, grand story, and it's just really not. It's Zelda couldn't do it because she was basically being abused by her dad, and she was throwing hissy fits, and then when everyone died, she overcame her problems. And it's like, there you go. 20 seconds, that's the story. And that's fine. But at the same time, if that's the entire story, I don't even know if the game is better with it. Because Breath of the Wild comes eerily close to the Majora's Mask theme I talked about. Breath of the Wild is very close to having that very close to having that feeling that Link is a hero because you like to explore. Breath of the Wild, almost more than any other game, could have nailed that. But it almost feels invalidated when you get your memories. And it becomes, no, you're not doing this because you want to explore. You're doing this because Hyrule's in danger and you have to help your friends from 100 years ago. Whereas if you would have just left out the memories, but then kept characters in talking about who Link was, it could have been drawing the parallel that who Link was is who you make him become because of your tie to the gameplay. If it would have been that because you like to explore, you keep meeting people and helping them, it would have tied back to how Link was. He's a hero because he helps people. You like to explore, and whether it's for the good of others or for the reward you're going to get, you help people. It would have made it so that the way that you play the game helps tie you back to Link. But instead, it's just, oh, you went to a spot, you hit A to recall, and now you're closer to being the same person you were 100 years ago. It's way more shallow. And in theory, I kind of like the memory system because of the fact that it ties in the story to the exploration, right? And this is really something that I actually like, and I talked about this when I played it, is it's incredibly brave that they let you explore the story out of order. You can watch the cutscene of Zelda basically saying that, like, there's a cutscene where Zelda basically just says, like, oh, you're perfect at everything, aren't you? But if someone else had been telling you to do it, would you have done it? And she's talking about how, like, Link can't do something, and it's super childish and petty because of the state Zelda was in at that point in the past. And you could just hate this version of Zelda. You could permanently be kind of irked by her because of the story, the order you experience the story, and that's really something else as a writer, to let the audience go in any order. But ultimately, it doesn't really matter that much unless you ignore every prompt to go to Kakariko and then get the memories out of order that way. But it's just really, really bizarre. The characters are all flat. Almost every character in the game boils down to like one trait, and then they tell you to do something or something. I mean, it's fine for NPCs because it's like, oh, I'm a kid, ha ha ha, or I'm an artist, but I'm really bad at drawing. You know, it's cute, but that's all it is. But it's no different with the champions. Urbosa's, you know, tough lady. Rivali is actually the closest to being complex, but even then, he's just a dick. Let's be honest. Radunia, whatever his name is, Darunia. I don't know what his name is. I'm just gonna call him Darunia. He's the big brother. Grr. You know, Mipha is nice healer lady in the party, and it's like, but the game wants you to care so much about them, but they don't put in the effort of putting in, like, I think the cutscene total with these characters is like under 3 minutes. And they're like treated as core members of the story. And it kind of just goes to like, it needed way more if you wanted the story to work as it does. Like, if you want the story to work as it does, there has to be a way for Link to interact with these characters without his memories. You kind of get forced to get your memories back when you go to each town. But if there had been a way for you to avoid the specific memories with each character, they could have interacted with who Link is now, that he doesn't have his memories. And they could have drawn that parallel again, that like Link just ends up being a hero again because that's inherent to who he is. You can try and justify that in the lore as like, well, he has the Triforce, so he's always going to end up being the same nice person. But I think that would have been really interesting to explore the story from that angle. But it's just you getting the memories of a linear story back, but just in some order that you kind of can do. So it's kind of like this weird middle ground where it's like, it doesn't explore an actual non-linear story, that can be done in multiple ways, but it also doesn't have the structure and strength of a linear story. It's kind of weirdly in the middle. Other problems with Breath of the Wild just include the fact that your stamina wheel is pitifully small until it's basically infinite because of your inventory. The combat scaling is fucking weird. I was doing like pretty good against Calamity Ganon, but fucking hell if I had to fight a black moblin. You know, it's funky. It's out there. I accidentally beat Thunderblight Ganon without using the Master Sword. Not Thunderblight, Windblight. Because all I did was use a Forest Dweller's bow with bomb arrows. And in one descent of bullet time, I was able to completely destroy him. I mean, I was using attack ups, but that's a resource the game gives you. And I was doing it to like kind of damage him, and I accidentally beat him in one go because of that. But then a random Lionel before Ganon, after I had gotten all my new items and armor and infinite resources and Master Sword, and the Master Sword is super strong right now, and all of that, and the Lionel just fucking annihilated me. And the placement of it's weird too, because the Lionel is right before Ganon, and the Lionel is harder than Ganon. It's kind of odd. It's a little weird. The Master Sword sucks in this game. Basically, because it breaks, you end up using it more like kind of as your like default, and then when it breaks, you just kind of switch to something else. It's only strong against Guardians, which is like good, I guess, but doing 30 damage to everything else just feels awful. It feels not good. A lot of the changes that would have made Breath of the Wild very good are gatekeeped behind Amiibo and DLC. For instance, in the DLC, you can permanently upgrade your Master Sword's damage and durability to 60, and the upgraded durability it gets when you fight Guardians, but that's paywalled behind DLC. You can get Wolf Link, which is like a cool companion idea for combat, but it's behind an amiibo that I believe is already like unavailable. You can't buy anymore other than through scalpers. There's just tons of... One thing the DLC implements is that there's way more armor sets to find throughout the world, so it actually rewards exploration more, like I would want. But again, it's paywalled. And then the bike you get through the DLC basically is what horses were trying to be, but again, it's in a DLC. It's not the base game. And it's very weird. It's very weird. So I just did all that, and that got me a ton of dislikes, a ton of angry comments, a ton of who is this nobody, a ton of get good, a ton of and Nick is mid is a neat, L. But what do I like about Breath of the Wild? For one, you know, the exploration is the strong part. It does have flaws in it. The rewards you get for doing it are kind of whatever, but, you know, until you get bored of it, that feeling of just going, I'm going to go there, and then brute forcing your way there is fun. Right. I don't think it carries as much content as there is in the game, but I do think that it's very good. I think I don't know. I really dislike the durability system. It makes all of your weapons just feel worthless. And it creates this weird system where you don't want to use them because if you use a 60 power weapon on a bat, you wasted it. You wasted that hit of durability. But at the same time, a permanent weapon, a truly permanent weapon, would almost invalidate the combat system. So it's kind of this weird middle ground where it's like the system doesn't really feel good, but it kind of has to be that way. At the same time, though, I'd still think that a weak permanent weapon would not break it. It would just be a skill versus, like, it would be patience. Like, are you going to hack away with a 20 power weapon at a Lionel? It's like, no. No one in their right mind would do that. But having a 20 power weapon for, like, bats and choo-choos and stuff would be perfect, right? So that you don't have to use your fucking, like, 70 power dragon bone longsword spear against a bat. You know, one interesting thing I've noticed too about the discourse on this game is that people who don't like the durability hate it, but the people who defend it don't really like it. Like when you look at Majora's Mask, a lot of people hate the time travel, but the people who like it love it, like me, right? But when you go to durability, people hate it, and then the people defending it don't have like that same strong love for it in the opposite direction. It's almost like they know that they don't even really love it, it just has to be there. Because like a permanent 40 power weapon would like basically ruin the game. What else do I like about Breath of the Wild? It's beautiful. And because of the fact that the world is what you're exploring, the beauty of the world is a massive benefit to it. If the game was not cel shaded the way it is, it would be horrible. The style works, the way that they've designed the world so that the objects and landmarks are constantly in view is genius. It makes the world feel real, and it's beautiful to look at. The game does run poorly docked, but I've also played it in handheld before, and I say on handheld it runs pretty smoothly. Which is pretty impressive. I wish you could turn it to 720 when docked so it just ran smooth, but whatever. Nintendo is always weird about that stuff. I do like the way that the outfits look. I think that this is one of the best looking incarnations of Link. With all the outfits you can wear, the way his hairstyles will change, all of that. You can cross-dress. Very cool. They all have their distinct feeling. The barbarian stuff feels very like savage and Lionel-like. The water outfit feels all elegant and pretty. The fire stuff feels like a Goron. It feels all rough, kind of clunky, you know. The feather stuff, the bird stuff is all elegant. It all works. It all makes sense. The physics engine is something everyone praises. It's pretty cool. I don't know if it's worth like not having dungeons and stuff, but it is nice sometimes to make a fire and then glide above it. It's cool. I think there are probably about 15 to 25, maybe 30 good shrines in the game. And when they're fun, they're fun. But when they're not, they're just really, really bad. And it gets into, they designed the world so that you can go anywhere, but because of that, they kind of had to make the shrines all easy. The Link Between Worlds problem. But then they kind of don't. There's a shrine outside of Hyrule Castle that has a minor test of strength. And then, like, some of the ones that you can see early on, so, like, probably about a half the shrines you can visibly see from towers are just pretty common places you'll go. The out in the open ones. And, like, some of those have major tests of strength. Whereas, like, once you have to go out of your way to go into dangerous areas to have, like, minor tests of strength, and it doesn't feel right. More than anything, though, a lot of the problems with Breath of the Wild seem like they've been addressed in Tears of the Kingdom. And because of the fact that I'm going to spend so much time on Tears of the Kingdom, I did want to make this first. And then I want to update this when Tears of the Kingdom comes out and just talk about Tears of the Kingdom and gush. Because if they fix the problems I have with Breath of the Wild, it would be like up here. Like, if shrines were more fun, if there were more dungeons, if the durability system was tweaked, if enemy difficulty was scaled differently, if, like, grinding essentially for items was a little bit less not bad, Breath of the Wild would be like up here. And I'm assuming that's where Tears of the Kingdom will go. But I don't want to set my expectations too high at the same time. You know what I mean? But, I think Breath of the Wild is also a really good discussion on how much of a game's good side do you take above its bad. Because my favorite game of all time is Fallout New Vegas, right? And I talk about it a lot on the channel. People still comment on my New Vegas vids. And I like talking to them back about it, but New Vegas has a lot of problems, man. For one, the game is unstable. On certain systems, you can't even run it without modification. I mean, at least when you turn on Breath of the Wild and hit start, it fucking starts, you know? And New Vegas has a lot of things like clunky gameplay, long load times, which are in Breath of the Wild 2. You get a lot of problems in that game, right? But I think that the strengths of that game outweigh the bad. But for Breath of the Wild, I don't really think so. I think Breath of the Wild is strongly fun to explore and experience. But once that wears off, I don't think the goods outweigh the bad. More than anything. I really hope Tears of the Kingdom is just Breath of the Wild 2 in the good way, where it is just a game but better. And it's what it looks like, and I'm very excited for it. It's probably going to take like a solid month to get through that game, because it's like 4 times bigger or something crazy like that. But yeah. Anyways, I said shrines suck. The Divine Beast sequences are fucking sick, by the way. They're not very difficult, and I don't really care about that, but you riding Prince Sidon, the Sand Seal, and the Arrow Bomb Feather Time, those are all fucking epic. There's no other way to word it. It's so cool. It's just, it feels like this amazing sequence, but then it's so weird because it's like, on its own, it's just amazing gameplay, but it's like tying into the story, and the story around it's almost kind of mid enough that it drags down the cool thing you just did. The Divine Beasts themselves are also really boring as dungeons. They're all kind of at the level of like the Deku Tree, like, except for Naboris, they're all really that level where it's like, for the most part, one room, and you just have to consider the room in a different way, and it's like, that's it. I got stumped on some of them because I'm stupid, but I'm also accounting for my stupidity, right? Despite how stupid I am, I know how easy Link Between Worlds is. So I do think Divine Beast Von Naboris is a good-ass dungeon, though. Trying to consider all of those 3 central things and the puzzle above. And Thunderblight Ganon is actually a really tough, fun boss. I could not get good on him. I did have to use what the game gave me to overpower him, but it was still fun. I enjoyed it a lot. As far as Breath of the Wild goes, another strength also is Hyrule Castle. I do think that it's probably too easy if you get your gear upgraded to max durability. But when I played through it this time, I didn't have very strong defensive gear, but I had like the Master Sword and like a full inventory of good weapons. So it was this constant like timing, like when do I run, when do I fight. Exploring the whole castle felt fun to look for the Hylian shield. Hyrule Castle in general in Breath of the Wild is like one of the best dungeons in the series. It's a high point of the series itself. But yeah. I don't hate Breath of the Wild. I think I made that clear at the beginning. I do love it. But, you know, uh, Ocarina used to be the most widely, popularly regarded game of all time, and then Ego Raptor harshed on it, and then it became hated, and everyone started pointing out its problems. And it's like, I don't hate Ocarina of Time just because I don't think it's perfect. It's not my favorite. I just think that what's holding this down is a lot more. Specifically, if Tears of the Kingdom is what it sounds like, there won't be a reason to ever play Breath of the Wild again. And, like, kind of think about that. Like, even though Ocarina of Time is just Link to the Past 3D, they still have their own reasons to play them. Majora's Mask is a direct sequel to Ocarina of Time, but they're both so different, they're both worth playing. Link Between Worlds is literally the same game map in a 2D setting as Link to the Past, but the game mechanics make it so different that it's fun to play. But if Breath of the Wild just was fixed, there would be no reason to play it over its sequel. Which is something that I'm very curious to see how I feel about with Tears of the Kingdom. But that'll be it. I should probably stop now before I hate on Breath of the Wild anymore and get people mad at me. But I do love it. This is Breath of the Mild. But at worst, I would say these are like 3 out of 5s. They're close to not being good overall, but they're still good. Right? 3 out of 5 is not bad. I just think that it has problems. And I think that overall it's not quite as airtight a game as the games above it. There's also another thing, this is purely a tier list. So, the idea that these are ordered, the gap between Link's Awakening and Breath of the Wild is probably closer than Breath of the Wild and like original Ocarina. But it's still not quite in the same tier. But anyways, I was pretty mean to Breath of the Wild, so comments, go nuts. I'm a nobody. I'm a no name. I think that's it. See ya.